I never thought a 50-foot orange extension cord would land someone in jail, but here we are. It started on a Tuesday morning in late September when I was outside my townhouse in Sterling Heights, Michigan, minding my own business and pressure washing my driveway. The electrical outlet closest to my driveway was inside my garage, so I had my heavy-duty extension cord snaking out from under the garage door, across the small strip of grass, and plugged into my pressure washer. I had been working for maybe 20 minutes when I heard that voice. "Excuse me." "Excuse me, sir." I turned off the pressure washer and looked up to see Brenda Patterson marching across her lawn toward me. Brenda was the self-appointed queen of our HOA, a woman in her mid-50s with an asymmetrical blonde bob that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She wore yoga pants and a pink fleece jacket, and she had that look on her face, the one that said she was about to make my day significantly worse. "Can I help you?" I asked, already knowing this was not going to be a pleasant conversation. "That extension cord," she said, pointing at my orange cord like it was a crime scene. "It's crossing the common area." I looked down at the cord. It crossed maybe 2 feet of the grass strip that separated my driveway from the sidewalk. "Brenda, I'm just washing my driveway. I'll be done in an hour." The HOA bylaws clearly state that personal property cannot be placed on common areas without written permission from the board. She crossed her arms over her chest. "I'm the HOA president, and I'm telling you that cord needs to be removed immediately." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that getting into it with Brenda was never worth it. "I'm almost done. Give me an hour." "No, the rules exist for a reason, Aaron. If I let you break them, then everyone will want to break them." She said my name like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "Brenda, it's an extension cord. I'm cleaning my property. This is ridiculous." "What's ridiculous is your blatant disregard for community standards." She pulled out her phone. "I'm documenting this violation for the next board meeting. You'll be receiving a fine." "A fine?" "For an extension cord that's going to be gone in an hour. Rules are rules, Aaron." I was about to respond when she did something that made my blood run cold. She walked over to my extension cord, bent down, and unplugged it from my pressure washer. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice rising. "I'm removing the violation." She started wrapping the cord around her arm. "That's my extension cord, Brenda. Put it down." It was on common property, which means it becomes HOA property until the violation is resolved. She continued winding the cord. "That's not how this works. That's theft. It's enforcement." She had nearly half the cord wrapped around her arm now, walking backward toward my garage to get more slack. I stepped toward her. "Brenda, I'm serious. Put my cord down right now." "Or what? You'll assault me. I'll have you arrested so fast, nobody's assaulting anyone." "That's my property, and you're stealing it." She yanked the plug from my garage outlet and stood there with my entire 50-foot extension cord wrapped around her arms like some kind of bizarre trophy. "You can retrieve this from my house once you've paid your fine and submitted a written apology to the board. You're insane, and you're in violation." She turned and started walking toward her house, which was 3 doors down from mine. I stood there for a moment, genuinely stunned. In the 5 years I had lived in this HOA community, Brenda had been a constant source of petty complaints and arbitrary rule enforcement, but she had never actually stolen anything from me before. I pulled out my phone and did the only thing I could think of. I called the police. The non-emergency dispatcher sounded almost amused when I explained the situation. "So your HOA president took your extension cord?" "Yes, right out of my hands. Well, off my driveway. She just walked up and took it. And you want to file a theft report?" "I do." "Okay, sir. We'll send an officer out to take a statement." I went inside to wait, watching through my front window as Brenda disappeared into her house with my cord. My wife, Christina, came downstairs, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on?" she asked. "I heard you yelling." "Brenda stole my extension cord." Christina blinked at me. "What?" I explained the whole absurd situation, watching her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally resignation. Christina was used to Brenda's antics. Last summer, Brenda had tried to fine us because our mailbox was the wrong shade of black. The HOA bylaws specified midnight black, and according to Brenda's paint swatch, ours was onyx black. We had to bring in the original receipt from the hardware store to prove it was the right color. "You called the police?" Christina asked. "She stole my property. What else was I supposed to do? I mean, you're not wrong, but this is going to make things so much worse with her. I don't care anymore. I'm done with her treating everyone in this neighborhood like her personal servants." 20 minutes later, a Sterling Heights police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. The officer who got out was young, maybe late 20s, with a nameplate that read Morrison. He had the look of someone who had responded to too many ridiculous calls that day already. "You reported a theft?" he asked as I met him at my front door. I did. My HOA president took my extension cord without permission. Officer Morrison pulled out a notepad. "Let's start from the beginning." I walked him through everything: the pressure washing, Brenda's complaint, her unplugging and taking the cord. He took notes, occasionally glancing toward Brenda's house. "And this extension cord, what's it worth?" "I paid about $40 for it. It's a contractor-grade 50-footer. "Okay, and she said you could get it back if you paid a fine," and submitted a written apology. Officer Morrison closed his notepad. "Let me go talk to her." I watched from my doorway as he walked down to Brenda's house and rang her doorbell. She opened it almost immediately, and I could see her animated gesturing from where I stood. Whatever she was saying it with conviction. The officer held up a hand, clearly trying to get a word in, but Brenda just kept talking. After about 5 minutes, Officer Morrison walked back to my house. "Sir, she's claiming that under your HOA bylaws, she has the right to confiscate items that violate community standards. That's not a real thing. She can't just take people's property." I explained that to her. I told her that HOA bylaws don't supersede property law and that taking your extension cord without permission constitutes theft. He paused. "She told me I didn't understand community governance and that she'd be filing a complaint with my supervisor." "So what happens now?" "Now I go back there and explain to her that she needs to return your property immediately, or I'll have to charge her with theft." "She's not going to take that well. Most people don't." He almost looked amused. "But the law is pretty clear here. She took your property. She needs to give it back." I watched Officer Morrison return to Brenda's door. This conversation was shorter and looked significantly more tense. I could see Brenda shaking her head vigorously, her hands on her hips. The officer said something and Brenda's face turned red. She slammed her door. Officer Morrison stood there for a moment, then spoke into his radio. I couldn't hear what he said, but a few minutes later, another police cruiser arrived. This officer was older, with sergeant's stripes on his uniform. He and Officer Morrison had a brief conversation, then both approached Brenda's door. This time when Brenda answered, I could hear her voice from my house. "This is harassment. I'm being harassed by the police for doing my job as HOA president." The sergeant said something I couldn't make out. Brenda's response was loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "I'm a registered nurse. I save lives, and you're treating me like a criminal over an extension cord that was illegally placed on common property." Several neighbors had emerged from their houses now, drawn by the commotion. I recognized Tom and Sarah Williams from across the street, and old Mr. Chen from the corner unit. Everyone watched as the situation at Brenda's door escalated. The sergeant's voice was calm but firm. "Madam, I need you to return the extension cord to its owner or we'll have to place you under arrest for theft." "You can't arrest me. I have work tonight. I'm a nurse at St. John Hospital." "Then return the extension cord." "No. He was in violation of HOA rules." "Madam, HOA rules do not give you the right to take someone else's property. This is your last warning. Return the cord or you'll be arrested." There was a moment of silence, and I thought maybe Brenda had come to her senses. Then I heard her say, "Get off my property before I call your supervisor." "Madam, turn around and put your hands behind your back." "What? No, you can't. You're under arrest for theft. You have the right to remain silent. This is insane. Let go of me. I'm being assaulted." I watched in absolute disbelief as Officer Morrison and the sergeant led Brenda out of her house in handcuffs. She was screaming about police brutality and HOA rights and how she was going to sue everyone. Several neighbors had their phones out, recording. Brenda was loaded into the back of the sergeant's cruiser, still yelling, her face pressed against the window. Officer Morrison walked back to my house carrying my orange extension cord. "Your property, sir." I took it, feeling surreal. "She's really under arrest." "She is." Theft is theft, regardless of someone's perceived authority. He handed me a case number. "We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. Bring any documentation you have about the incident." "What happens to her now?" "She'll be processed. See a magistrate, probably post bond. The prosecutor will decide whether to move forward with charges." He looked back at the cruiser where Brenda was still making a scene. "Between you and me, she didn't do herself any favors with how she handled this. We gave her multiple opportunities to just return your property." After the police left, Christina and I just stood in our doorway, processing what had happened. Tom Williams crossed the street, shaking his head. "Did Brenda really just get arrested over your extension cord?" he asked. "She really did. Man, I wish I'd called the cops on her last year when she tried to fine me for having my trash cans visible from the street. It was trash day." Sarah joined her husband. "Do you think she'll actually be charged?" "I have no idea," I said. "This whole thing is insane." But it turned out to be just the beginning. The next day, I went to the Sterling Heights Police Department to give my formal statement. I brought my receipt for the extension cord, photos of my setup that morning, and a copy of our HOA bylaws, which I had carefully reviewed. Nowhere in the bylaws did it say the HOA president could confiscate personal property. The detective who took my statement was a woman in her 40s named Detective Walsh. She listened to my account, reviewed my evidence, and took detailed notes. "Has Miss Patterson had conflicts with other residents?" she asked. "Constantly. She's obsessed with rules and violations, but this is the first time she's actually taken someone's property." "You want to press charges?" I hesitated. Part of me felt ridiculous, pressing charges over a $40 extension cord. But another part of me was furious that Brenda thought she could just take whatever she wanted because of her HOA position. "Yes," I said. "I want to press charges." "Okay. We'll forward everything to the prosecutor's office. They'll make the final determination on whether to move forward." I left the police station feeling strange. I had never been involved in anything like this before. I had never pressed charges against anyone. But Brenda had crossed a line, and someone needed to hold her accountable. Over the next few days, the neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Everyone had an opinion about what happened. Some people thought I had overreacted, calling the police over an extension cord. Others, usually people who had been on the receiving end of Brenda's enforcement crusades, were quietly supportive. The most interesting development came from the HOA board itself. We received an email from James Patterson, Brenda's husband and the board's treasurer. The email was brief and professional. Brenda had been placed on administrative leave from her HOA duties, pending an internal review. In the meantime, the vice president would assume presidential responsibilities. Christina and I were both shocked. "I didn't think they'd actually do anything," she said. "James must be furious," I replied. "Can you imagine how embarrassing this is for him?" The internal HOA drama became even more apparent at the emergency board meeting called for the following week. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood pool. Usually, these meetings drew maybe 5 or 6 residents. This one had standing room only. The vice president, a mild-mannered accountant named Doug Henderson, looked deeply uncomfortable as he called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming. I know there's been a lot of concern about recent events. The board wanted to address the situation and discuss next steps." "Where's Brenda?" someone called out. "Mrs. Patterson is not attending tonight's meeting," Doug said carefully. "As you know, she's been placed on administrative leave. Is she going to face any consequences?" This was from Maria Gonzalez, who lived 2 streets over. "Because she's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. The board takes all violations of appropriate conduct seriously." "That's not an answer," Maria interrupted. "She got arrested. She stole someone's property. Is she going to be removed from the board?" Doug shuffled his papers nervously. "The board bylaws require a formal review process before any member can be removed. That process is currently underway." The meeting devolved into a heated discussion about Brenda's tenure as HOA president. Story after story emerged of her petty tyranny. Arbitrary fines, selective enforcement of rules, harassment of residents over trivial matters. It was like watching years of resentment finally bubble over. Tom Williams stood up. "Last summer, Brenda fined me $200 because my lawn was a 1/4 inch too long. A 1/4 inch. She measured it with a ruler. She tried to fine me for having a wreath on my door in July," said another resident. "Said wreaths were only allowed during winter holidays. She reported my daughter's lemonade stand to the health department." This was from a woman I didn't recognize. "My 8-year-old daughter, for a lemonade stand." Doug tried to maintain order, but the room was in full revolt. It became clear that Brenda had made enemies of nearly everyone in the neighborhood, and the extension cord incident had finally given people the courage to speak up. The meeting ended with a motion to conduct a full review of Brenda's actions as HOA president and to consider amendments to the bylaws that would limit presidential authority. It passed unanimously. As Christina and I walked home, she squeezed my hand. "You started a revolution with your extension cord." "I just wanted to wash my driveway," I said, but the situation was far from over. 2 weeks later, I received a call from the Macomb County Prosecutor's Office. They were moving forward with charges against Brenda Patterson, 1 count of theft and 1 count of disorderly conduct. I would need to testify if the case went to trial. "What are the chances it goes to trial?" I asked the assistant prosecutor, a young man named Kevin. "Hard to say. If Miss Patterson is smart, she'll take a plea deal. The evidence is pretty clear-cut and the police body cam footage is damning, but some people would rather fight on principle. And if she does fight it, then we go to trial. Based on what I've seen, I'm confident we'd win." But trials are always unpredictable. The really interesting development came a few days after that call. I was checking my mail when James Patterson approached me. He looked haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. "Aaron, can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Sure." He glanced around nervously. "I want to apologize for Brenda's behavior. What she did was completely out of line. I appreciate that, James. I also want you to know that I've encouraged her to take a plea deal. This whole thing has been a nightmare for our family." He rubbed his face. "Did you know they reported her to the Michigan Board of Nursing?" I felt my stomach drop. "Who did? The police, I think. Or maybe the prosecutor's office. Someone filed a complaint about her arrest." He looked at me with tired eyes. "Brenda's been a nurse for 30 years. This could cost her everything." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt guilty. I had just wanted my extension cord back. I hadn't wanted to destroy anyone's career. But another part of me remembered Brenda's face as she took my property, her absolute certainty that she was right and everyone else was wrong. "I'm sorry, James," I said finally, "but she brought this on herself." He nodded slowly. "I know. I just hope you understand the consequences of what's happening." After he left, I felt sick. I went inside and immediately looked up the Michigan Board of Nursing. Sure enough, nurses could have their licenses suspended or revoked for criminal convictions, especially those involving theft or dishonesty. If Brenda was convicted, she might lose the career she had built over 3 decades. Christina found me staring at my computer. "What's wrong?" I told her about my conversation with James and what I had learned about the nursing license. "Oh my God," she said softly. "I didn't mean for all this to happen. I just called the police because she took my cord." "Aaron, you didn't do anything wrong. Brenda made her choices. She could have just given the cord back when the police asked. She chose to get arrested instead." "I know, but no. Don't do this to yourself. Brenda has been bullying people in this neighborhood for years. You're not responsible for the consequences of her actions." Logically, I knew Christina was right. But emotionally, I felt like I had started a domino effect that was crushing someone's life, and I couldn't stop it. The next month was tense. Brenda's house had a "for sale" sign in the yard within 2 weeks of her arrest. I rarely saw her, and when I did, she looked through me like I didn't exist. The HOA board voted to remove her as president, though she retained her position as a regular board member until her term expired. Doug Henderson took over permanently as president, and his first official act was to eliminate about half of the petty rules Brenda had championed. Then came the court date. I received a subpoena to testify at Brenda's preliminary hearing. The hearing was held at the Macomb County Circuit Court in Mount Clemens on a cold November morning. I wore a suit and tie, feeling absurdly formal for a case about an extension cord. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with maybe 20 seats in the gallery. James was there, looking grim. A few of our neighbors showed up out of curiosity. And Brenda sat at the defense table with her attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s who radiated expensive competence. The prosecutor called me to the stand first. I was sworn in and took my seat, trying to ignore the way Brenda was glaring at me. The assistant prosecutor, Kevin, walked me through the events of that day. The pressure washing, the confrontation, Brenda taking the cord. I tried to be as factual as possible, sticking to what happened without editorializing. Then Brenda's attorney, who introduced herself as Miss Cunningham, cross-examined me. "Mr. Anderson, isn't it true that you were in violation of HOA bylaws when this incident occurred?" I was using an extension cord to clean my driveway. The cord crossed a small strip of grass for maybe an hour. But it was a violation of the bylaws, yes or no? According to Mrs. Patterson, yes. And as HOA president, wasn't Mrs. Patterson within her rights to enforce those bylaws? She could have given me a warning or a fine. She couldn't just take my property. But you admit you were in violation of a rule I think is ridiculous, yes. Miss Cunningham looked at the judge. "Your Honor, It seems to me that this case stems from a neighborhood dispute over HOA enforcement, not a criminal matter." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the defendant took property that didn't belong to her and refused to return it even when ordered to do so by police officers. The HOA bylaws don't grant authority to confiscate personal property. This is a clear case of theft." The judge, an older man with impressive gray eyebrows, looked at both attorneys. "I'll hear from the responding officer." Officer Morrison took the stand next. He described responding to my call, talking to both me and Brenda, and repeatedly asking Brenda to return the extension cord. "At any point did Miss Patterson return the property?" the prosecutor asked. "No, sir. She refused multiple times and insisted she had the right to keep it under HOA rules." "What did you do then?" "I consulted with my sergeant, and we gave Miss Patterson a final warning. When she continued to refuse, we placed her under arrest." Miss Cunningham's cross-examination focused on whether the police had overreacted. "Officer Morrison, isn't it unusual to arrest someone over a $40 extension cord? If someone steals a candy bar worth $1, it's still theft, madam. The value doesn't change the nature of the crime. But you could have simply written a report and let the parties resolve it civilly." "We tried that. We gave Miss Patterson every opportunity to return the property and avoid arrest. She chose not to." The preliminary hearing lasted about an hour. At the end, the judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence for the case to proceed to trial. Brenda's face went white. As we filed out of the courtroom, Miss Cunningham pulled the prosecutor aside. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could guess. They were discussing a plea deal. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I received a call from Kevin. "Brenda Patterson has accepted a plea agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "She's pleading guilty to attempted theft, a reduced charge. She'll receive 6 months of probation, have to pay restitution for your extension cord, and complete a course on conflict resolution." "That's it." "Well, she also has to stay away from you. There's a no-contact order as part of her probation." He paused. "The bigger consequence is going to be with the nursing board. A theft conviction, even for a reduced charge, is going to trigger a review of her license. James said someone reported her to the board." Standard procedure when someone in a licensed profession is arrested. The board takes those reports seriously. After I hung up, I sat with the information for a while. Brenda had avoided jail time, which seemed reasonable. But her nursing license was still in jeopardy, and that felt disproportionate to what had actually happened. She had taken my extension cord in a fit of HOA-fueled power tripping. Did she deserve to lose her career over it? I talked to Christina about it that night. Maybe I should write a letter to the nursing board, explain that this was just a neighborhood dispute that got out of hand. Christina gave me a long look. "Do you really think that's a good idea?" "I don't know. I don't want to ruin her life." "Aaron, you didn't ruin her life. She ruined her own life by refusing to give back your extension cord when the police asked her to. Multiple times." Christina took my hand. "You're a good person for feeling bad about this, but Brenda is a grown woman who made her own choices. You're not responsible for the consequences." "But if I hadn't called the police, then she would have kept your cord and probably escalated her behavior. What if next time she decided to confiscate someone's lawn mower or their car because it was parked wrong?" Christina squeezed my hand. "Someone had to stand up to her eventually. It just happened to be you." I knew she was right, but I still felt uneasy. That unease only grew when, in early December, I heard from Tom Williams that Brenda's nursing license had been suspended pending a full board investigation. "James told Sarah that Brenda's been in bed for 3 days crying," Tom said. "We were both outside getting our mail on a Saturday afternoon. Apparently the hospital put her on administrative leave." I heard about the license suspension. Yeah. James said the board is taking it seriously because it involves theft. Something about nurses having access to drugs and patient belongings, so any theft conviction is a major red flag. I felt that familiar twist of guilt in my stomach. That seems extreme for an extension cord. Tom shrugged. Maybe. But I've been thinking about it, and here's the thing. If Brenda is willing to steal your extension cord in broad daylight with neighbors watching, what else might she be willing to do when no one's watching? If I was a patient in a hospital, I wouldn't want a nurse who thinks rules don't apply to her. It was a fair point, but it didn't make me feel better. The holidays came and went. Brenda and James's house sold in January, which was fast for a Michigan winter. The new owners were a young couple with a baby, and they seemed friendly and normal. Brenda and James moved to somewhere downstate, according to neighborhood gossip. I never saw Brenda again after the court hearing. In February, I received a letter from the Macomb County Prosecutor's Office. It was a formal notification that Brenda Patterson had completed her probation requirements, and the case was closed. Enclosed was a check for $40, my restitution. I stared at the check for a long time. $40. That's what this had all been about. $40 and an extension cord and a woman who couldn't admit she was wrong. Christina found me in my office that evening. "You okay? Got the restitution check today. Case is closed." She sat down next to me. "And how do you feel about that? Honestly, I don't know. Part of me is glad it's over. Part of me still feels guilty about what happened to her nursing license. Did they take it away permanently? I don't know. I haven't heard anything official." I turned to her. "Do you think I did the right thing?" Christina thought about it for a moment. "I think you did what you had to do. Brenda stole from you. You called the police. Everything that happened after that was a result of her choices, not yours. But I could have just let her keep the cord." "You could have. But then what?" "She keeps acting like she can do whatever she wants because she's HOA president. She escalates to more serious violations because no one stops her." Christina shook her head. "Sometimes doing the right thing has consequences we don't like. That doesn't make it wrong." I appreciated her perspective, but I couldn't quite let go of the guilt. So I did something that probably wasn't smart. I looked up what happened with Brenda's nursing license. It took some digging through the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs website, but I eventually found the public record. Brenda Patterson's license had been formally revoked in late January. The board's decision cited her theft conviction and her demonstrated lack of judgment and ethical conduct incompatible with the nursing profession. Reading those words, I felt sick. Revoked. Not suspended, not probation, but revoked. 30 years of nursing gone. I called Kevin at the prosecutor's office, even though I wasn't sure why. I saw that Brenda Patterson lost her nursing license. "Yeah, I heard about that," he said. "The board doesn't mess around with theft convictions. Is there anything that can be done? An appeal or something?" "She can apply for reinstatement after a certain period, I think. But honestly, Aaron, that's between her and the nursing board. Your part in this ended when she completed her probation." "I know. I just feel like the punishment doesn't fit the crime." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "Can I be honest with you, please? I've been doing this job for 5 years. I've seen a lot of cases, a lot of defendants. Some of them are good people who made mistakes. Some of them are bad people who got caught." He paused. "Brenda Patterson isn't a good person who made a mistake. She's someone who's been abusing her authority for years, and she finally got caught. The nursing board didn't revoke her license because she took your extension cord. They revoked it because she showed them who she really is, someone who thinks rules apply to everyone but her. But nothing. You didn't ruin her life. You didn't take her license. You called the police when someone stole from you, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. Everything else is on her." After I hung up, I sat with his words for a long time. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that I had done the right thing and that Brenda's consequences were self-inflicted. But doubt lingered. That doubt finally started to fade a few weeks later when Doug Henderson called an HOA meeting. The meeting was to discuss the results of the board's comprehensive review of Brenda's tenure as president. "We've spent the last 4 months reviewing records, interviewing residents, and examining all fines and violations issued during Mrs. Patterson's presidency," Doug said to the assembled crowd. "What we found was disturbing." He pulled up a PowerPoint presentation on the clubhouse screen. The first slide showed a graph, fines issued by year. During the 3 years before Brenda became president, the HOA had issued an average of 12 fines per year. During Brenda's 5 years as president, that number had jumped to over 200 per year. Most of these fines were for violations that previous boards wouldn't have considered violations at all, Doug continued. Or they were based on rules that Mrs. Patterson invented without board approval. The next slide showed specific examples. A family fined for having toys visible in their yard, another for parking a truck in their driveway instead of their garage, another for having a vegetable garden in their backyard where it couldn't even be seen from the street. In total, Mrs. Patterson collected over $50,000 in fines during her tenure, Doug said. The board has voted to refund all fines that were issued for violations not clearly supported by our bylaws. The room erupted in surprised chatter. $50,000. That was how much Brenda had extracted from the neighborhood through her tyrannical rule enforcement. After the meeting, Maria Gonzalez approached me. "You did the neighborhood a favor, you know. If you hadn't stood up to her, she'd still be terrorizing all of us." Tom Williams echoed the sentiment. "Seriously, Aaron, that extension cord thing was the best thing that could have happened to this HOA. I went home that night feeling slightly better. Maybe I hadn't ruined Brenda's life. Maybe I had just held her accountable for her actions, and the consequences she faced were proportional to years of abuse of power, not just one extension cord. But I still wondered about her sometimes. Where was she now? What was she doing, now that nursing was no longer an option? Had she learned anything from the experience, or did she still think she was the victim? I got my answer in March, in the most unexpected way. I was at Home Depot buying supplies for a landscaping project when I saw her. Brenda was wearing a store uniform, working at the customer service desk. She looked older than I remembered, more tired. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw something in her expression. Anger, yes, but also something else. Shame, maybe, or resignation. I considered walking over, saying something. Apologizing, perhaps, or asking how she was doing. But before I could decide, she looked away and helped the next customer in line. I left the store without approaching her. What would I have said anyway? Sorry that calling the police on you for stealing my extension cord cost you your nursing license. It felt absurd. That evening I told Christina about seeing Brenda. She looked miserable. "I'm sure she is," Christina said. "She lost a lot, because of me. No, because of her choices." Christina gave me that look, the one that said we had been over this too many times already. "Aaron, you need to let this go. You didn't do anything wrong." "I know, it's just weird seeing her like that. I'm sure it is. But that doesn't change the facts. She stole from you, refused to give it back when asked, and got arrested. Those were her choices. You were just trying to clean your driveway." I nodded, but the image of Brenda at that customer service desk stayed with me. She had gone from being a nurse, a respected professional, to working retail at Home Depot. That was a hard fall, and I had played a role in it, even if it was unintentional. Over the following weeks, I found myself at Home Depot more often than necessary, always looking for Brenda. I'm not sure what I was hoping for, maybe closure, maybe just to assure myself she was okay. But after that first sighting, I never saw her there again. Maybe she worked different shifts, or maybe she had already moved on to another job. The HOA drama, meanwhile, continued to evolve. Doug Henderson proved to be a much more reasonable president than Brenda had been. He eliminated most of the petty rules, focused on actual maintenance issues, and generally treated residents like adults rather than subjects. The neighborhood became noticeably more relaxed. In April, the board held a special meeting to discuss the refund of improperly collected fines. Christina and I were entitled to $800 in refunds for various violations Brenda had cited us for over the years. $800. I hadn't even realized it had added up to that much. "This is insane," Christina said as we looked at the refund check. $800 for things like our mailbox being the wrong shade of black. And that time we put our trash cans out the night before pickup instead of the morning of, I added. That was a $100 fine. Brenda was just stealing from everyone, and we all let her because she was HOA president. It was true. Brenda had been operating what essentially amounted to a protection racket, using her position to extort money from residents over fabricated or exaggerated violations. The extension cord incident hadn't been an isolated case of poor judgment. It had been the moment when her pattern of behavior finally became impossible to ignore. That realization helped ease my guilt. I hadn't ruined Brenda's life over an extension cord. I had simply been the catalyst that exposed years of misconduct. If it hadn't been me and my extension cord, it would have been someone else and some other petty dispute. In May, I ran into James Patterson at a gas station. He was filling up his car, and I almost didn't recognize him at first. He had lost weight and looked healthier than he had during the trial. "Aaron," he said when he noticed me, "how are you?" "I'm good. How are you doing?" "Better, actually." He finished pumping gas and leaned against his car. "I know this is probably weird, but I wanted to thank you." I blinked in surprise. Thank me for calling the police that day, for not backing down. He looked tired but sincere. Brenda had a problem, a serious problem with needing to control everything and everyone. I tried to talk to her about it for years, but she wouldn't listen. What happened with you and the extension cord, the arrest, losing her nursing license, it was rock bottom for her. I'm sorry about her license. I never wanted that to happen. I know. But it needed to happen. She's been going to therapy, working on herself. We almost got divorced, but we're trying to make it work. He managed a small smile. She's not the same person she was when she was HOA president. Losing everything forced her to look at herself, and she didn't like what she saw. That's good. I'm glad she's getting help. She's embarrassed about what happened. She knows she was wrong. If she could take it all back, she would. James pushed off from his car. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know that you did the right thing, even if it didn't feel like it at the time." We shook hands and went our separate ways. As I drove home, I felt something shift inside me. For months, I had been carrying guilt about Brenda's consequences. But maybe those consequences had been necessary. Maybe sometimes people need to lose everything before they can rebuild themselves into something better. That summer was peaceful. The HOA remained functional but unobtrusive. Our neighborhood felt like an actual community again, rather than a police state. People decorated their yards without fear of fines. Kids ran lemonade stands without worrying about health department complaints. It was nice. Christina and I used our refund money to take a long weekend trip to Chicago. As we walked along the lakeshore, she brought up the extension cord incident. "You still feel guilty about what happened with Brenda?" she asked. I thought about it. Not as much. I think I've finally accepted that I didn't do anything wrong. Good, because you didn't. I know. It just took me a while to understand that I wasn't responsible for her choices, just my own. And your choice was to not let someone steal your property. That's reasonable. It is. Even if the consequences were bigger than I expected. We walked in silence for a while, enjoying the summer weather and the view of the lake. Then Christina said something that put the whole experience in perspective. "You know what I think? I think this was never really about an extension cord. It was about someone finally saying no to Brenda. She had been pushing and pushing for years, taking advantage of people's reluctance to make waves. You were just the first person who pushed back. She was right. The extension cord was just an excuse, a tangible object around which a much larger conflict had crystallized. Brenda's theft of my property was simply the culmination of years of smaller thefts. Theft of peace, theft of autonomy, theft of the basic right to live in your own home without constant harassment. In August, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Brenda and James had moved out of state. Someone said Florida, someone else said Arizona. Either way, they were gone, and I was relieved. Not because I wished them ill, but because their absence meant I could finally close that chapter completely. The final piece of closure came in September, almost exactly a year after the initial incident. Doug Henderson called to tell me that the HOA board had voted to amend the bylaws to include specific protections against abuse of authority by board members. "We're calling them the Patterson Amendments," Doug said with a hint of humor. "They limit what board members can do without majority approval, establish clear guidelines for fines, and create an appeals process for residents who think they've been unfairly cited." "That's great, Doug." "It is. And honestly, we should thank you for it. If you hadn't stood up to Brenda, we'd probably still be operating under her regime of terror." After we hung up, I went outside to my garage. My orange extension cord was coiled neatly on a shelf, right where I had stored it after the police returned it. I picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, 50 feet of contractor-grade cord that had accidentally started a revolution. I took the cord outside and plugged it in, just to make sure it still worked. It did, of course. I used it to power my pressure washer and spent the afternoon cleaning my driveway, just like I had been trying to do a year ago. The cord stretched across that same strip of grass, the one that Brenda had declared common property. No one bothered me. No one complained. No one tried to confiscate my equipment. It was just a normal Saturday afternoon in suburban Michigan, and I was just a guy cleaning his driveway with an extension cord. As I worked, Tom Williams walked by with his dog. "Hey, Aaron, pressure washing day?" "Yep, getting ahead of the fall leaves." "Good thinking." He paused, looking at my extension cord with amusement. "That's the famous cord, isn't it? This is it. The cord that started everything." Tom laughed. "You should frame it, put it in a museum or something." "Nah, it's more useful out here doing its job." "Fair enough. See you around, Aaron." After he left, I finished washing my driveway, coiled up my extension cord, and put everything away. The whole process took about an hour and went off without a single problem. Later that evening, Christina and I sat on our back porch with glasses of wine, watching the sunset. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. A kid rode by on a bicycle. Someone was grilling in their backyard. Normal suburban sounds. "You know what I realized today?" I said. "What's that?" "The whole point of an HOA is supposed to be maintaining property values and creating a pleasant community. But Brenda was doing the opposite. She was making everyone miserable and turning neighbors against each other." "True." So by stopping her, I was actually doing what the HOA was supposed to do in the first place. I was protecting the community. Christina smiled at me. Look at you, all enlightened. It only took me a year to get there. Better late than never. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to pink to purple. Somewhere in Florida or Arizona, Brenda Patterson was presumably doing the same thing, maybe with a new perspective on life and authority and the importance of not stealing other people's extension cords. I hoped she was doing well. I genuinely did. Not because I felt responsible for her downfall, but because I believed what James had told me, that hitting rock bottom had given her a chance to become a better person. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is exactly what you need. As for me, I had learned my own lessons. I had learned that standing up for yourself, even in small things, matters. I had learned that guilt and responsibility aren't the same thing. And I had learned that sometimes the right choice has uncomfortable consequences, but that doesn't make it the wrong choice. My orange extension cord sat in my garage, ready for the next project. It was just a tool, 50 feet of insulated copper wire and rubber coating. But it had become a symbol, a reminder of the day I decided not to let someone walk all over me, and that was worth more than $40. The following spring, Doug Henderson's term as HOA president came to an end, and elections were held for a new board. Christina surprised me by running for a position, and she won easily. Her platform was simple: reasonable rules, fair enforcement, and treating residents with respect. Revolutionary concepts, apparently. At her first board meeting, she proposed eliminating the rule about personal property on common areas, the rule Brenda had cited when she took my extension cord. The motion passed unanimously. So technically, Christina told me afterward, what Brenda fined you for isn't even against the rules anymore. Good. It was a stupid rule. Most of her rules were stupid. We've eliminated about 20 of them already. Under the new board, the HOA became what it should have been all along: a practical organization focused on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement. Dues were used for landscaping, pool maintenance, and neighborhood events. Fines were rare and reserved for genuinely problematic situations. The neighborhood thrived. Property values went up. People were friendlier. Kids played outside more. It was amazing what happened when people weren't constantly worried about being cited for violations. I thought about Brenda sometimes, usually when I was using that extension cord. I wondered if she ever thought about that day, about the choice she made to take my property rather than just letting me finish my pressure washing. Did she regret it? Did she understand how that single moment of stubborn authority wielding had cost her so much? I hoped she did. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because understanding is the first step toward growth. If Brenda could look back and see how her need for control had poisoned her relationships and eventually destroyed her career, then maybe losing everything hadn't been in vain. As for the extension cord, it served me well for years. I used it for pressure washing, holiday light displays, and various yard projects. Every time I plugged it in, I remembered that September morning and the absurd confrontation that had followed. It became a good story, the kind you tell at parties. Did I ever tell you about the time I got someone arrested over an extension cord? People always laughed, thinking it was an exaggeration. Then I'd tell them the whole story, and they'd realize it was all true. Some people thought I had overreacted, calling the police over something so minor. But most people, especially people who had dealt with difficult HOA boards themselves, understood. They got that it wasn't really about the cord. It was about principle, about not letting people abuse authority just because they could. Years later, Long after Brenda Patterson had become just a story I told occasionally, I finally replaced that extension cord. It had served me well, but the insulation was cracking, and I needed something more heavy-duty for a renovation project. As I threw the old cord away, I felt a strange sense of nostalgia. It was just a piece of equipment, worn out and ready for disposal. But it represented something important. The day I stood up for myself, the day I refused to be bullied, the day I learned that doing the right thing isn't always easy but is always worth it. The new extension cord worked just as well as the old one. Better, actually, because it was newer and more durable. But it didn't have the same history, the same story, and that was okay. Some stories only need to be lived once.